It was just a slip, a joke in the heat of the moment. I didn't mean anything by it. We were watching his movies earlier. I was tipsy, and honestly, my boyfriend knew I had a thing for him. It was harmless, right? Everyone keeps acting like I deliberately set out to humiliate my boyfriend during our most intimate moments, but they have no idea what it feels like to make one thoughtless mistake that destroys everything you've built with someone over 18. Months of love, laughter, and what I thought was unbreakable trust. That Saturday evening had been perfect in every way that mattered. We'd spent the day at the farmer's market, cooked dinner together, and settled in to watch Call Me By Your Name, because I'd been wanting to see it again, and Ethan had never watched it all the way through. The movie had put me in a dreamy romantic mood, especially the scenes with Timothée Chalamet, looking absolutely ethereal in the Italian countryside. Ethan had made several playful comments about my obvious attraction to the actor, teasing me about the way I'd sigh whenever he appeared on screen. It was the kind of comfortable, flirtatious banter that had always characterized our relationship. Ethan secure enough to joke about my celebrity crushes, me comfortable enough to admit that yes, I found certain actors attractive without it. Threatening what we had together, after the movie ended, we'd opened another bottle of wine and moved to the bedroom, where the combination of romantic atmosphere, alcohol, and genuine affection for each other had created the perfect conditions for intimate connection. Everything about the evening felt natural and loving. Ethan's hands were gentle and knowing. The way he touched me was familiar yet exciting, and I felt completely safe and desired in his arms. That's when I made the mistake that would destroy our relationship and my reputation within our entire social circle. In what should have been the most intimate moment between us, when I should have been completely present with the man I loved, I whispered Timothy's name instead of Ethan's. The words slipped out before I could stop them, born from some confused combination of the movie we'd just watched, the wine we'd consumed, and whatever stupid fantasy had been playing in the back of my mind. The effect was immediate and devastating. Ethan went completely still above me, every muscle in his body tensing as he processed what I'd just said. For a moment that felt like eternity. Neither of us moved or spoke, the weight of my mistake hanging in the air between us like a toxic cloud. Then, without saying a single word to me, Ethan got up from the bed, pulled on his clothes with sharp, efficient movements, grabbed his phone from the nightstand, and walked out of the bedroom. I called after him, trying to explain that it had been a meaningless slip of the tongue, that I'd just been thinking about the movie and hadn't meant anything by it. But he didn't respond or even acknowledge that he'd heard me. The front door closed with a definitive click that told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he was taking what had happened. I spent the rest of that night lying alone in bed, alternating between shame about my thoughtless mistake and anger at what seemed like a massive overreaction to what had essentially been a momentary brain malfunction caused by too much wine and too much Timothée Chalamet. By morning, I was confident that we could work through this misunderstanding with honest conversation and maybe some self-deprecating humor about my embarrassing slip of the tongue. But when I woke up, I discovered that Ethan had spent the night planning a systematic revenge that would humiliate me more thoroughly than I'd ever imagined possible. The first sign that something was catastrophically wrong came when I checked my phone and found 27 notifications from various social media platforms, text messages, and missed calls from friends who were clearly reacting to something I hadn't seen yet. Before I could fully process the volume of activity on my phone, I noticed that half of Ethan's belongings were missing from my apartment. His clothes, toiletries, books, and electronics had been removed with the same efficient precision he'd shown when leaving my bedroom the night before. But Ethan's physical departure was nothing compared to the digital warfare he'd waged while I was sleeping. He'd apparently spent hours going through our text message history, screen recording conversations where I'd made playful comments about finding Timothée Chalamet attractive or joked about my celebrity crushes. These private conversations, which had seemed harmless and even endearing when we were having them, now looked completely different when presented as evidence of my supposed emotional infidelity and disrespect for our relationship. But Ethan hadn't just shared these screenshots with one or two close friends for advice or support. He'd sent them to our entire mutual social circle, including coworkers, college friends, and family members who now had access to intimate details about our relationship and my personal thoughts. The most devastating blow was the Instagram story he'd posted that morning. A simple text image that read, "Imagine being in love and hearing her moan someone else's name." He hadn't tagged me or mentioned me by name, but everyone who followed both of us immediately understood who he was talking about. The story had been up for hours by the time I saw it, generating dozens of comments and reactions from people who were either expressing sympathy for Ethan or making jokes at my expense. The combination of the screenshots and the Instagram story created a narrative where I was the villain who had humiliated my devoted boyfriend by fantasizing about celebrities during our most intimate moments. Friends who had previously supported our relationship were now sending me messages asking for my side of the story, but their tone suggested they'd already made up their minds about what kind of person I was based on Ethan's carefully curated evidence. The professional implications were immediate and devastating. Co-workers who followed me on social media were clearly aware of the situation, making workplace interactions awkward and uncomfortable in ways that affected my ability to focus on important projects. Even worse was realizing that Ethan had been strategic about the timing of his social media campaign, posting everything during peak weekend hours when maximum numbers of people would see and share his content. By the time I tried to respond with my own explanation of what had happened, the narrative was already established, and my attempts at damage control only made me look defensive and guilty. What made Ethan's revenge particularly cruel was his decision not to block me on any platforms or change his phone number, creating the illusion that communication was still possible while making it clear that he had no intention of engaging with anything I had to say. Every text message I sent was delivered and read almost immediately, but never answered. Every attempt at calling went to voicemail. Every social media message showed as seen but ignored. The systematic nature of his non-responses made it clear that this wasn't about him needing time to process what had happened or figure out his feelings about our relationship. This was Ethan making a calculated decision to torture me with the possibility of reconciliation while ensuring that possibility never materialized. His silence left space for everyone else in our social circle to fill in the blanks about what had happened and what it meant about my character and our relationship. Without Ethan providing his own narrative or defending me against the worst interpretations of my behavior, mutual friends were free to speculate about whether I'd been emotionally cheating, whether I'd ever really loved him, and whether my celebrity crush had been more serious than anyone had realized. The most painful aspect of his silence was how it highlighted every message I sent, making my attempts at apology and explanation look increasingly desperate and pathetic as they accumulated without response. I found myself analyzing the read receipts obsessively, trying to determine from the timing of his message viewing whether he was considering responding or just checking to see how much I was suffering. The uncertainty was more devastating than anger or confrontation would have been, because it kept me in a constant state of hope and anxiety, rather than allowing me to move forward with acceptance that our relationship was over. Ethan's strategic silence also prevented me from having the kind of closure conversation that might have helped our mutual friends understand my perspective or see the situation as more complex than his social media narrative suggested. Instead, I was left trying to defend myself against accusations and interpretations, while the person who could provide context remained mysteriously absent from all discussions about our relationship. 2 weeks after the Timothée incident, I made the mistake of attending a group brunch with mutual friends, thinking that enough time had passed for people to move on from the drama and treat me with some semblance of normalcy. Instead, I walked into what felt like a carefully orchestrated public humiliation designed to make me as uncomfortable as possible while maintaining plausible deniability about the intent behind everyone's comments and behavior. The hostility wasn't overt or explicitly cruel, which somehow made it worse than direct confrontation would have been. Instead, it was a series of subtle digs, meaningful looks, and loaded comments that created an atmosphere where I felt constantly under attack without being able to point to any specific instance of obvious cruelty. The worst moment came when someone at the table asked, with fake innocence, whether Timothée Chalamet had become my new boyfriend since Ethan was no longer in the picture. The comment generated uncomfortable laughter from the rest of the group, but their amusement felt hostile rather than friendly, like they were enjoying my discomfort rather than making a light-hearted joke about an awkward situation. Even the restaurant staff seemed aware of my situation, with our waiter giving me strange looks that suggested he'd either heard about my social media drama or been briefed by someone at the table about why I was being treated as a social pariah. The conversation throughout the meal kept returning to relationships, loyalty, and the importance of treating partners with respect, with people making pointed observations about how devastating it must be to discover that your girlfriend fantasizes about other men during intimate moments. I tried to participate normally in conversations about work, current events, and other neutral topics, but every attempt at changing the subject was eventually steered back to relationships and the importance of emotional fidelity. By the end of the brunch, it was clear that my social circle had collectively decided I was persona non grata, not worthy of the friendship and support I'd enjoyed for years before my thoughtless mistake had revealed what they saw as fundamental flaws in my character. The most painful realization was that none of these people had bothered to ask for my side of the story, or consider that Ethan's social media narrative might be incomplete or unfairly biased against me. They had simply accepted his version of events and decided that my behavior was unforgivable, regardless of the context or my own feelings about what had happened. In the months that followed Ethan's systematic destruction of my reputation and social connections, I was forced to spend long, lonely evenings confronting what my Timothy moment had really revealed about my approach to relationships and emotional commitment. The apartment that had felt like our shared sanctuary during 18 months of love and partnership now felt like a museum of my own failures, filled with evidence of how little I'd appreciated what I'd had with Ethan while I was busy fantasizing about impossible romantic alternatives. Looking through old photos on my phone was particularly torturous. Images of us laughing together at concerts, cuddling on beach vacations, celebrating birthdays and holidays with the kind of genuine affection that had made our relationship feel special and lasting. In every photo, Ethan looked completely happy and devoted, like someone who had found exactly what he was looking for in a romantic partner. I looked happy too, but now I could see something else in my expression, a kind of restless dissatisfaction that suggested I was always looking for something more exciting than what I had. The man in those photos wasn't perfect, but he was real in ways that mattered more than I'd understood while we were together. He remembered my coffee order, supported my career goals, listened patiently when I was stressed about family drama, and generally made me feel loved and valued every single day. Going through our shared Netflix history was another form of torture, seeing all the movies and shows we'd watched together, especially the romantic films that had sparked conversations about attraction, celebrity crushes, and the difference between fantasy and reality in relationships. I could now see how these conversations had probably been building Ethan's insecurity over time, as I'd consistently expressed enthusiasm about male actors and celebrities while treating our own relationship as something comfortable but uninspiring. During those cozy movie nights that I'd remembered as perfect domestic bliss, I'd been unknowingly chipping away at Ethan's confidence by constantly directing my romantic energy toward impossible fantasies rather than appreciating the real love that was sitting right beside me. He'd been planning to propose. I found the ring receipt while cleaning out a drawer we'd shared, dated just 2 weeks before my thoughtless mistake had destroyed everything he'd been hoping to build with me. The receipt was hidden behind some old bills, creased and worn, like he'd been carrying it around and looking at it frequently, probably getting excited about the future we were going to build together. While Ethan had been shopping for engagement rings and planning our future together, I'd been maintaining an active fantasy life about celebrities who would never know I existed. The ring he'd chosen was perfect. Exactly my style, the right size, from the jewelry store I'd mentioned liking when we'd walked past it months earlier. He'd been paying attention to details I didn't even remember sharing, planning the most important moment of our relationship while I was busy thinking about other men. I found the proposal plans too, tucked away in his laptop bag, a reservation at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, arrangements for a photographer to capture the moment, even a backup indoor location in case of bad weather. Everything had been planned with the same meticulous attention to detail that Ethan brought to everything he cared about, proof of how much thought and love he'd been putting into making our engagement special and memorable. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me that I'd whispered Timothée Chalamet's name to someone who was actually planning to spend his life with me, someone who had chosen me over all other possibilities while I was treating him like a convenient placeholder until my fantasies materialized. Reading through our old text conversations was another form of self-torture that revealed how consistently I'd been prioritizing fantasy over reality throughout our relationship. For every sweet message Ethan had sent me about missing me or looking forward to spending time together, I'd sent 3 messages about whatever celebrity I was obsessing over at the moment. Our chat history was filled with screenshots I'd sent him of attractive actors, musicians, and social media personalities, along with my commentary about how gorgeous they were or how much I'd love to meet them. At the time, I'd thought sharing these attractions with Ethan was evidence of how comfortable and honest our relationship was, proof that we could talk about anything without jealousy or insecurity. But looking back at the messages, I could see how one-sided these conversations had been. Ethan had rarely shared similar attractions to other women, focusing his expressed desires and attention entirely on me, while I'd been broadcasting my interest in every attractive man who crossed my social media feeds. Most devastating was the recognition that Ethan's revenge, while cruel and humiliating, had been fundamentally accurate in its assessment of my character and priorities. I really had been emotionally unavailable in ways that made me unsuitable as a long-term partner for someone who was capable of exclusive devotion and commitment. My celebrity obsession hadn't been harmless entertainment. It had been evidence that I was more invested in impossible fantasies than in the real relationship that was available to me. The amount of time I'd spent scrolling through Timothée Chalamet's Instagram, watching his interviews, and discussing him with friends had been time and emotional energy that should have been directed toward appreciating and nurturing what I had with Ethan. I'd been maintaining detailed knowledge about celebrities' personal lives, career updates, and romantic relationships while being increasingly inattentive to Ethan's own goals, concerns, and emotional needs. The Timothée slip hadn't been a random mistake. It had been my subconscious mind revealing where my attention and desires really focused, even during moments when I should have been completely present with the person I claimed to love. During our most intimate moments, when Ethan deserved to have my complete focus and appreciation, part of my mind had been elsewhere, fantasizing about someone I'd never met, rather than being fully present with the man who was actually there loving me. The dating apps I'd kept on my phone, supposedly deleted but actually just hidden in folders, were more evidence of my inability to commit fully to what Ethan and I were building together. I'd told myself I kept them for entertainment, just to see what was out there. But the reality was that I'd been maintaining emotional escape routes throughout our entire relationship. Even while living with Ethan, sharing domestic responsibilities, and making future plans together, I'd been keeping my options open for someone who might offer more excitement or better match my fantasies about perfect romance. Future relationships would be affected by my reputation for emotional infidelity and my demonstrated inability to appreciate devoted partners, as word of my behavior spread through dating communities where such information influences people's willingness to trust someone with genuine vulnerability. The social media posts, the screenshots Ethan had shared, and the stories that mutual friends were telling about my behavior had created a permanent digital record of my character flaws that would follow me into any new romantic situations. Men who might have been interested in serious relationships would see me as someone who couldn't be trusted with exclusive commitment, while the ones who didn't care about emotional fidelity probably weren't capable of offering the kind of love that Ethan had given me. But perhaps most painfully, I realized that I'd lost someone who had been genuinely irreplaceable. Not because he was perfect, but because he had loved me completely, while asking for nothing more than the same exclusive commitment in return. Ethan hadn't been the most exciting or passionate man I'd ever dated, but he'd been the most consistent, supportive, and genuinely caring partner I'd ever had. He'd seen me at my worst and chosen to stay, supported my dreams even when they were inconvenient for him, and made me feel safe and valued in ways I'd never experienced before. The stability and security he'd offered hadn't been boring or insufficient. They'd been the foundation that could have supported a lifetime of shared growth, adventure, and deepening intimacy. Instead of appreciating those qualities and building on them, I'd taken them for granted while chasing fantasies that could never provide the real partnership, support, and love that lasting relationships require. The silence in my apartment wasn't just the absence of Ethan's voice and presence. It was the sound of consequences for treating real love like entertainment while I waited for fantasy romance to rescue me from the work of genuine partnership. I whispered his name sometimes in the darkness, the right name, Ethan's name, but there was no one left to hear it except the empty walls of a home that would never again contain the warmth and laughter we'd shared before I'd thrown it all away fair. A moment of thoughtless fantasy. Some mistakes don't just hurt the people we make them about. They reveal truths about our capacity for love that can't be taken back or explained away. Truths that change forever how others understand what we're capable of offering in intimate relationships. The most devastating realization was that Ethan had been right to leave immediately and completely, without giving me chances to explain or apologize or promise to change. He'd recognized that my Timothée moment wasn't an isolated mistake, but evidence of fundamental problems with my ability to be present, grateful, and exclusive in romantic relationships. And rather than wasting more time trying to fix someone who wasn't ready to be fixed, he'd chosen to protect himself and find someone capable of the kind of love he deserved to receive, to receive, to receive, to receive, to receive.